one legislates for mankind. At the time of Socrates, the Greeks already had a centuries-long tradition of poetic education, going back centuries to the time of Homer and Hesiod, that set out certain exemplary models of heroic virtue and civic life. The Homeric epics were to the Greek world what the Bible is to our world. That is to say, in some respects, the ultimate authority regarding the way of the gods, their relation to the world, and the type of virtues appropriate to human beings. The virtues endorsed by the poetic tradition, of which Aristophanes is the great representative here, the great inheritor and representative. The virtues of this tradition were the virtues of a warrior culture, of a people, of warlike peoples and men at war. These were the qualities that had guided the Greeks for centuries and contributed to their rise to power. It contributed to Athens as well as Sparta's rise to greatness from a small, dispersed people to a great world power, and again allowed them to achieve a level of artistic, intellectual, and political accomplishment akin to Renaissance Florence, Elizabethan England, and Goethe's Weimar. So what is at stake in this quarrel between Socrates and the poets, between Socrates and the poetic tradition that he alludes to? First, Socrates' manner of teaching is markedly different from the poets, right? Does anyone know here the opening line of the Iliad, Homer's Iliad? Does anyone know the first line? You want to remember that from high school? What? Well, right. Right. I mean, sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles, right? Sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles. The poets are oracular, right? They call on gods and goddesses to inspire them with song, to fill them with inspiration, to tell stories of people with superhuman strength and courage and anger. Okay? By contrast, you could say, the method of Socrates is not oracular. It is not storytelling. It is conversational. It is argumentative, if you want to use the word he applies to it. It is dialectical. Socrates makes arguments, and he wants others to engage with him to discover which argument can best withstand the test of rational scrutiny and debate. There are no arguments in Homer's Iliad or Odyssey. You hear strong and compelling stories, no arguments. Socrates makes, in other words, continual questioning and not the telling of stories and the recitation of verses, the essence of this new political education. He questions the methods of teaching of the poets. But secondly, again, Homer and the poets sing the virtues of men at war. Socrates wants to replace the warrior citizen with a new kind of citizen, a whole new set, you might say, of citizen virtues. The new Socratic citizen, let's call him that for a moment, the new Socratic citizen may have some features in common with the older Homeric warrior, but Socrates ultimately wants to replace military combat with a new kind of, you might say, call it verbal facility, verbal combat, in which, again, the person with the best argument is declared to be victorious. The person with the best argument. Let the best argument prevail. The famed Socratic method of argumentation is basically all that remains of the older pre-Socratic culture of struggle and combat. The new Socratic citizen is to be trained in the art of argument and dialectic, and we will talk a little later about what that means. So, it is as a challenge or as a challenger to the poets and all they stand for, the century-long tradition of poetic education, that Socrates asserts himself, that Socrates presents himself. The Apology shows Socrates as offering a new model of citizenship, a new kind of citizen. His challenge to the poets is, in a way, the basis for the resentment that has built up against him and that Aristophanes and what he calls the earlier accusers have brought to bear. In fact, you might say, so seriously was Socrates taken by Aristophanes and the poets that Aristophanes devoted an entire play. He wrote an entire play about Socrates called The Clouds. The Clouds, right? Devoted to debunking and ridicule Socrates' profession of learning. Aristophanes' play, sometimes it's even included in certain editions of the book you're reading, like this one. It has the edition of the Aristophanes' Clouds in it, along with the Apology and Crito. The existence of that play shows to all of us just how seriously Socrates was taken by the greatest of his contemporaries, and Aristophanes was, along with Sophocles and Euripides and others, among the greatest of the Greek playwrights. The mockery, you might say, mockery of Socrates remains one of the sincerest forms of flattery. They took him very seriously. Let me just say something about The Clouds, this comic play, this satire on Socrates, because it is part of that initial accusation that Socrates says is leveled against him. Here, Aristophanes presents Socrates as an investigator, and this is part of the first charge, remember, an investigator of the things aloft and the things under the earth, and who makes the weaker argument the stronger. That's the argument that Socrates says Aristophanes brings against him. In this play, Socrates is presented as the head, the leader, the director of what we might think of as the first think tank in known to human history. It's called in the play itself the Frontisterion, which means, or is sometimes translated as the thinkery, or the thinkateria, or simply a kind of think tank, where Athenian fathers bring their sons to be indoctrinated into the mysteries of Socratic wisdom. And in the play, Socrates is shown hovering, flying above the stage in a basket in order better to be able to observe the clouds, the things aloft, right? But also, in many ways, symbolizing Socrates', at least on the Aristophanes account, Socrates' detachment from the things down here on earth, the thing that concern his fellow citizens. Socrates is a kind of what in German people will call a Luftmensch. He's a man up in the air, you know, kind of. He's so detached. He doesn't have his feet on the ground. And Socrates is shown not only mocking the gods in doing this, but he is shown by Aristophanes to teach incest and to teach all of the things that violate every decent human, taboo. Incest, the beating of one's parents, all these kinds of things. Socrates is presented as a kind of corrosive skepticism, which is at the core of Aristophanes' charge against him. To make a long story short, the play concludes with Socrates' think tank being burned to the ground by a disgruntled disciple. An object lesson for all later professors, I would say, who teach nonsense. Right? Okay. Don't get any ideas. Take a match to the department. So, How accurate is that picture of Socrates, the man who investigates the things aloft and the things under the ground? The Clouds was written in 423 when Socrates was in his mid-40s. And the Aristophanic Socrates is essentially we call a natural philosopher, again, investigating the things aloft, under the ground. He is what we would call today a scientist, a natural scientist. But this seems quite removed, doesn't it, from the Socrates who was brought up on charges of corrupting the young and impiety in the Apology. And here is where Socrates actually tells a story, very important in the course of this speech. He provides a kind of intellectual biography of an incident that occurred long before the trial and set him on a very different path. He recalls the story, don't you remember, of a man named Chaerephon, a friend of his, who had gone to the Delphic oracle, who had gone to the oracle at Delphi and asked if there was anyone wiser than Socrates, and was told there was not. Socrates tells us that when he was told this, he expressed disbelief in the oracle. He didn't believe it. And in order to disprove the oracle statement, he says he began a lifelong quest to find someone wiser than himself, a quest that in the course of which led him to interrogate the politicians, the poets, the craftsmen, all people reputed to be knowledgeable. And his conversations led him to ask questions, not about, as we would say, natural scientific phenomena, but questions about the virtues, as he tells us, the virtues of a human being and a citizen, what we would call today perhaps moral and political questions. That incident that Socrates tells here